Hello, and welcome to Larry Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Dean Doyle, and I'm really happy to have you here today. Whether you're listening during your commute, a quiet moment at home, or somewhere in between, thank you for choosing to spend this time with me. So take a breath, get comfortable, and let's get into today's session. Tonight I want to talk about something most Americans never see up close. What happens when a citizen tries to use the Freedom of Information Act the way Congress intended? Over the past months, I've filed 60 FOIA requests with one agency of the federal government. Not 60 complaints, not 60 accusations. 60 lawful requests for records that the government is obligated to preserve and produce. And what I have received in return is 2 documents. Not because the records don't exist, not because the law exempts them, but because somewhere along the way the system stopped believing it had to follow its own rules. I've been told, without anyone saying it directly, that filing 60 FOIAs is somehow improper, as if the problem is the citizen asking questions and not the agency refusing to answer them. I've received weekly updates on a request for herbicide records on Okinawa, updates that said nothing more than weekly update. No search terms, no custodians, no progress. Just a placeholder to run out the clock. And 4 months later, the file was closed with a no records determination. I've had an agency ask for a virtual meeting, not to clarify my request, but to talk me out of appealing their denial, a denial they later upheld with another no records response. This isn't how the rule of law works. FOI is not a courtesy. It is not a favor. It is a statutory right, one that Congress enacted because the American people cannot hold their government accountable if the government controls all the information. And in the specific area I'm researching, there's an additional layer of law, a federal preservation order issued in the Agent Orange multi-district litigation, MDL 381. That order requires all federal agencies to preserve all documents related to herbicide use, storage, testing, transportation, and health effects. Not for 6 years, not until it becomes inconvenient, not until the litigation is fully resolved, but the order has never been lifted. So when I'm told that records were destroyed after 6 years, I know 2 things immediately. First, the statement is factually incorrect, and second, that it is legally impossible under the preservation order. What I've learned is this: the FOIA system doesn't fail because the law is weak. It fails because the culture inside the agencies has drifted away from the rule of law, away from transparency, away from accountability, and away from the idea that public has the right to know what his government is doing. But here's the part that matters. I'm not going anywhere. The veterans who came before me didn't quit when the system ignored them. They didn't quit when the truth was inconvenient. They didn't quit when the government told them no records. And I'm not quitting either, because the rule of law is only as strong as the people willing to stand up for it. What I'm describing tonight is not a story about how I was treated. It's not about inconvenience. It's not about frustration. And it's certainly not about getting my feelings hurt. This is about something far more serious. It's about what happens when government agencies forget that the rule of law is not optional. It's about what happens when the rights guaranteed under common law, rights older than the Republic itself, are treated as if they can be brushed aside when they become inconvenient. The Constitution did not invent the rule of law. It recognized it. It codified it. And the Bill of Rights exists for one purpose: to restrain government power and protect the individual's right to know, speak, to petition, and hold the government accountable. FOIA is not a modern invention. It's a statutory expression of a principle that goes back to the Magna Carta. The people have a right to understand the actions of the government that rules in their name. When an agency ignores a lawful request or delays it without cause or issues a no records response that contradicts its own documents, it is not just violating a statute. Let me give you one example that shows how far the FOIA system has drifted from the rule of law. I had a single FOIA request, tracking number 2534917F. One request, one subject, one citizen asking for records the government is legally required to preserve. That request generated 65 emails. Let me say that again, 65 emails. And after all that, the department still didn't understand what the request was about. It started with an FOIA processor who told me to stop sending information because she believed it was an Okinawa herbicide request. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with Okinawa. It was a records request, and they misclassified from the very beginning. From there, the request was misrouted, mishandled, and misunderstood. It bounced between different offices. It was forwarded to OGIS, and after reviewing the mess, OGIS said they couldn't even determine where the request was in the FOIA process or what assistance they could provide. Think about that. A federal oversight office whose entire job is to help resolve FOIA disputes looked at the department's record and said, essentially, we can't tell what happened here. That's not a requester problem. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a systematic department failure. When a single FOIA request produces 65 emails and still results in confusion, misrouting, and contradictory statements, it tells you something important. They are no longer following the rule of law. It's improvising, it's reacting, it's trying to manage the request instead of processing it. And that is exactly why the FOIA system is breaking down. Not just for me, but for anyone who tries to use it the way Congress intended. It is violating the very principle that separates a constitutional republic from arbitrary power. When an agency criticizes a citizen for filling out too many FOIA requests, it is forgetting that the right to petition for redress of grievances is protected by the First Amendment. When an agency sends meaningless weekly updates for months and then closes a request with no records, it's not just avoiding work, it's undermining the public's right to know. When an agency asks for a meeting to talk a citizen out of appealing a denial, it's not engaging in transparency. It's attempting to avoid accountability. And when an agency claims that records were destroyed after 6 years, while a federal preservation order requires those records to be preserved, it is not merely mistaken, it's acting outside the law. The rule of law is not a slogan. It is a discipline. It is a boundary. It is a promise that government power will be exercised according to rules, not preferences. And when those rules are ignored, the injury is not to me, the injury is to the republic. Because if the government can decide which laws to follow, then people no longer live under a rule of law. They live under the rule of discretion. And that is not what the Constitution guarantees. There's a reason I haven't walked away from this process, even when the system makes it difficult as possible. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it because generations of veterans before me fought for recognition, for truth, and for the simple dignity of having their government acknowledge what happened to them. Many of them never lived to see that recognition. Many died waiting for answers that were locked away in filing cabinets, withheld behind bureaucratic languages, or dismissed with the phrase "no records." They kept fighting anyway, and I owe them more than silence. I also owe something to the next generation, the young men and women who will one day look back and ask whether we defended the principles we inherited or whether we allowed them to erode through negligence and indifference. The rule of law is not self-executing. It survives only when citizens insist that the government follow it. It survives when ordinary people demand that agencies obey preservation orders, honor statutory rights, and respect the constitutional boundaries that protect the public from secrecy and arbitrary power. When I file an FOIA request, I'm not asking for a favor. I'm exercising a right that belongs to every American. And when I challenge a denial, I'm not being difficult. I'm defending the principle that the government does not get to decide which laws it will follow. This work is slow, it's often frustrating, but it is necessary, because if we stop insisting on transparency, the government will stop providing it. If we stop demanding accountability, the government stops practicing it. And if we stop defending the rule of law stops defending us. I continue this fight because the veterans who came before me never quit. I continue because the Constitution demands it. And I continue because the truth matters, not just for me, but for every citizen who believes that a government of the people must also be accountable to the people. As I wrap up today's episode, I hope it gave you something to think about, and maybe even something to carry with you and think about. If this session resonated with you, please feel free to share it with a veteran or dependent who is suffering, or someone that might need to hear it, or someone who may be interested in this topic. And don't forget to click the follow icon so you don't miss future episodes and sessions.